unexpected one. Assassin like no other is here to bring a video that it was supposed to come out months ago, but I didn't get around to it for a lot of reasons. I was thinking, contemplating, meditating on what I wanted to say, and more than ever, I think it's that time I dropped this video. What happened to the Black Revolution? Now, I will link a link, and it will be in the description box below, to a video I just I made it the same day, recorded, whatever, of Am I Pro Black? Okay. Now, this video, if you don't mind, let me take this back to some history. Okay. Let me take this way back to this whole thing of what happened to the Black Revolution, because you got to understand the full context of the situation. I won't take it way back to, let's see, where do I want to start? Where do I want to start? I'll take it back to the Roman Empire. No. Let me take it back beyond there. Okay. Let me take it back to the Greeks, and the Greeks' involvement with the Egyptians. Now, if you know anything, you're like, whoa, what? I ain't here for all. I tie everything together. Let's believe that logically. I like to go back to the roots, real roots. With the Greeks, okay, pretty much known as the founders of a lot of Western philosophy, or most Western philosophy, I should say. With the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, where did they learn much of their philosophy? From the Egyptians. And let's see, was it in Memphis? I'm trying to remember. Alexandria. It was different universities, more or less, different schools, academies that we would go to. And a lot of Egyptian thought came from Kush. Kush was just down a little bit south, and Kush, which actually came from Ethiopia as well. So there's this long history. Okay. There was medicine, there was astronomy, there was philosophy, a lot of philosophy, mathematics, a lot of elements. Okay. And so the Greeks went from there, and we could go there. We could say the Romans, Roman occupations, Northern Africa, if we want to talk specifically amongst black people. But you can go through the Middle East as well. Now, flash forward to about, we got about 600 years, 800 years later. Talking about Christ, Ethiopia. We get to when Islam, the Muslim, the conquest. Whether you agree with it or not, this historical. The slave trade began in the 7th century, the 600s, 600s. The African slave trade really picked up. Now, slavery had been, the slave trade had existed for pretty much since the dawn of man, but it really picked up with the Arab slave trade. And then we move on, okay, to the age of navigation, beginning with the Portuguese and the late 15th century, late 1400s. Now, the Portuguese would eventually become, unbeknownst to a lot of people, it was not the British, it was the Portuguese, not even the Spanish. The Portuguese were the main slave traders. They would go to places, for example, later in Mozambique, different places in Western and then eventually Eastern Africa. And they went all the way to India to some degree. But they would get these slaves. And we also have to remember that the chiefs and different individuals sell out their own people or opposing tribes to these different ones, because the Europeans couldn't get to the Europeans. I'm going to say the white men, but the Europeans couldn't get to the interior, especially I should say the Western Europeans couldn't get to the interior of Africa, couldn't get to the interior of the continent, the motherland. Okay, and so this process went on. Spain, Brazil, was under Portuguese domination. Spain owned most of the New World, what's called the New World. A lot of, especially South America, owned pretty much all of South America. A lot of Central America, or most of Central America, I should say. A lot of the Caribbean and some parts of North America as well. Eventually, the French came. They didn't really, get involved with that. They were a lot more individual. And then the British came along. They came later to the game. The Spanish Empire waned. You could begin with the Spanish Armada failing in 1588, and there's a lot of elements. There's a lot of monetary elements in the way they ran things. The British came up late. The especially they came up in the 18th century, the 1700s, and they began establishing on North America and blah blah blah. And this more or less starts where we get, because okay, in the 1600s, people came as indentured servants, indentured servitude. Now this wasn't just black people. This was both black and white, anybody, a debt slave, just different reasons why people came under bondage. And eventually they would be free and you can now. But along the way, during the 18th century, it became more focused on black people. Easy, cheap labor. I mean, a lot of the natives either been massacred or died off because of disease and whatnot. You can bring this cheap over from Africa. Okay? And we continue on. And then we get to the establishment of the United States of America. The establishment of the U.S. America, spelled with a K, get it right. But, the Masons set things up, but they didn't exactly, the Freemasons, but eventually they were overridden by the public's, distrust and a whole bunch of elements that, so what the Masons set up was not, didn't come to fruition fully. Okay. People have a large misconception of a lot of what the Masons are. Just put it out there. Satanic and all that, it's not necessarily the case. Or at all the case, I should say. There's a lot of deists, a lot of thought, because first again, George Washington was a Mason, I believe Thomas Jefferson, Voltaire, Marquis de Lafayette, a lot of these dudes were Masons. I believe John Adams, Sam Adams, a lot of these dudes were Masons. Many of the founding fathers were Masons. So that's how they had a connection. There was Masonic lodges, France, England, Britain, Great Britain, and in the States, and these colonies. And the thing about it is, you have to understand this concept that John Jay, if you go back to the Federalist Papers, he said it early on. I believe it was in the 6th. I'd have to go back and look, but it was early on in the Federalist Papers, and he said we have one nation, one people, one religion, pretty much, which it was predominantly European white, predominantly British, Anglo-Saxon, and they accept French. Okay, now I'll say this now. Every people, was it just black people? Whether you're Asian, Chinese, Japanese, you're screwed. You were screwed. If you were Polish, screwed. Greek, screwed. Italian, screwed. The Scandinavians, they pretty much slide. Germany, But Spain was pretty much white at the time. But let's see. If you were Latino, screwed. If you were Native American, especially Native Americans, them people got no voice, screwed over, pretty much near genocide. Pretty much all peoples. Russian, different peoples, you name it, screwed. If you pretty much were Anglo-Saxon and French, pretty much screwed. Understand this. Scotch-Irish, screwed. The Irish were screwed as well. So there's a lot of people that were screwed, so don't get that twisted. But back to the whole thing, this whole one nation, one people, one culture, pretty much. Now, call it what you will, but there was economics involved. There's a whole 3/5 agreement. Okay, because actually at the time, there's still slavery was a massive debate at the beginning. The nation almost wasn't even formed. Okay, 3/5 agreement was made. Even though slaves didn't have a right to vote, they counted 3/5 because they was worried about population, because the South was mainly comprised, or a large part comprised, of slaves. But yes, there were slaves in the North as well. Okay, and this kind of agreement was only supposed to last like 20 years, and slavery was supposed to be gone. Britain abolished slavery in 1808, legally, officially. There's a whole thing about William Wilberforce and whatnot. But the states, it continued, and economics, and then lifestyles, okay? And eventually, if you speed it up, there'll be, the North became industrialized, the South was agriculture, mainly plantation. In the West, there was 3 philosophies which led to the Civil War. The West was adventure and was forging its own identity, okay? Outlaw and different stuff. Ranchers, miners, just different lifestyles. Now, with the South and the plantations, it was the economics behind it, the socioeconomics became so ingrained into the society that taking that away would have destroyed everything. And it's a complicated thing, but we move on to the antebellum period, and eventually, Abraham Lincoln said it best. There was still massive racism up in the North, but, could go to be free, and especially Canada, you could go to be free through the Underground Railroad and whatnot. and house divided cannot stand. Pretty much a scriptural preference, scriptural reference. You're saying half slave and half free. That wasn't necessarily the case, but understand where he's coming from. Then we have the Civil War. Lincoln gets killed. Now here's a pivotal part of the nation's history: the Reconstruction period. Understand that the Reconstruction period was not a good period, not at all, for America, because what happened was there were blacks thrust into positions of power. There were white, there were Southerners, and different individuals who were screwed over by the war. They were broke. They were so this anathema, this hatred. There became the sharecropping. It became, this is like, this is not fair. The radical Republicans, not necessarily Republicans, but the radical Republicans, overstepped their boundaries and forced stuff. It was more or less military oppression. So who do you take it out on? Think about it. The poor white, So everybody was getting screwed by this. In the South, got screwed by the Civil War. The destruction of Atlanta, destruction of a bunch of infrastructure. Say it was a rebellion. No, it's not that simple. I won't get into all the Civil War, the things behind it, but understand the Reconstruction period and improper power was placed. Now, in the North, at the same time, there was what was called wage slavery, and it was a lot of ways. Jefferson Davis said child slavery was better than wage slavery, because at least you had to take care of the slaves, you had to different stuff. But in factory stuff, you lose your job, you just die, you bury yourself. So dudes was just getting by. So there was still nonsense going on even in the North, and with the former Union as well as the former Confederacy. So times changed, and things went on. And a lot of people don't know, Ku Klux Klan began in Indiana, in the North, not in the South. But ideologies were adopted because of fear of the other, because of fear of the unknown, because people were impoverished, because people were trying to get by. And Ku Klux Klan came down south, took a stronghold, and you had Democrats, invested. Because at the time, originally with Lincoln and all them, the Republican Party was anti-slavery. It was an abolitionist party, and then things happened later on. Okay, and so the Southern Democrat became known. If you're black, you vote Democrat, and blacks couldn't vote, blacks couldn't be involved, and there was segregation laws and eventually Jim Crow laws, and a lot of these elements. Sorry, and so when you take all this in consideration, then the whole thing about do nothingism, okay, of this passive, natural, it doesn't work like that. Talk about human affairs, it doesn't work to the whole natural. People have to take action, okay. And it comes back to something, you can read Dr. Martin Luther King's a letter from Birmingham jail, okay, and talking about nonviolent protests, and just a lot of things had been building and then exploding in the 60s, okay. Now in the 60s is quite interesting, because things has really started heating up in the 30s. FDR, he didn't Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't go far enough. Teddy Roosevelt, a lot of these presidents didn't go far enough, and kind of thing. Of course, the whole policy, big money, and that's a whole separate issue. Now when we come to the 50s and the 60s, stuff started heating up, okay. And then you had the civil rights movement. You had white people aligning with black people, because people sensed a sense of justice. Times were changing. People recognized what was wrong. You had that even back in the Underground Railroad. You had some whites. They knew what was wrong. Slavery and whatnot was immoral. This segregation is immoral. Okay. You had Brown versus the Board of Education. You had a lot of things being challenged in the Supreme Court and the courts of law, but the courts of law often were rigged, and it was a racist, sexist system. Still a racist, sexist system. Different change. A lot of sexism towards males, but that's a whole another topic. Okay. In the 60s, you have this. You have in 65. You see the March on Washington and Dr. King, and he's been in jail and different things. You see Malcolm X, but Malcolm X, he comes back and talks peace and stuff. He gets assassinated. I'm telling you, this man was assassinated by the Feds. The Fed helped, and the Nation of Islam had his men assassinated. And the Feds help. You can say, no, come on, we have to put the facts together. Then you had the hippies come along, and people say, well, how? The hippies. I'll see how this all, because this is beyond just what happened in the Black Revolution. It's all these revolutions. Okay. 1968. you have, and that's 65. 68. Well, let me take it back to, you had Abraham Lincoln assassinated. Um, you can go back to that. Then you had Dr. King assassinated. I mean, you had Malcolm X. Then you had Dr. King assassinated in 68. And a bit later, Robert Bobby Kennedy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK was assassinated in 63. You had Malcolm X assassinated in 65. Dr. King was assassinated in 68. Then you had Robert Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in 68 in July. If he would have been president, whole American history changes. Whole American history changes. Okay. Along this time, from you can say 65, but especially from 67 to 70. From 65 to 70, you had the hippie movement, and once again the CIA. The FBI. With, Dr. King on a more of like a blacklist or whatever. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover was monitoring them, and they wanted to get these dudes out here because these dudes were a threat. Okay. JFK, a number of things. The Cubans at the time, Cuban government. I shouldn't say the Cubans, but the Cuban government under Castro. You had the Russians, and the U.S. government. You had the mob. So many people wanted had a reason, for wanting JFK dead. Bobby Kennedy went against the mob. Okay, so there's a lot of things. Dr. King, combination of people probably had him fooled as well, assassinated. All these assassinations. With the hippie movement starting in the 60s, these young people, and it started before that, because you can go back to the beats, the original the hip generation in the 50s. It was moving, and it was white, mainly white college students. They're rising up, and they're recognizing, they're seeing social ills. Then you had Vietnam. You had the Vietnam War, which exposed a lot of the BS in American culture and the way things are operated in this military-industrial complex before the prison-industrial complex. And the hippies, they would come up and they would ride, trying to do ways. Now the original hippies, in some ways, they're wrong, but they were making strides. You had these different revolutions, even sexual revolutions. A lot of things happened. But what happened after Bobby Kennedy? Then they became 69. You had Woodstock, but then after Woodstock, there was a Western Woodstock, and there was plants and acid hitting the street. Acid helped, but also hindered. Okay, because how do you question, how does acid even hit the streets? Because if you go back and look, LSD should have never been outside of laboratory. Well, government pushing stuff. And that'll come apart with heroin a bit later. Now, heroin had been an issue, but you'll understand that in the inner cities, especially amongst the black community. How does that come? Opium. Same thing, morphine. Morphine is derived from opium as well, the opium poppy. So, heroin is derived. How does this get there? Governmental plans. In more a sense of cocaine, the same thing, eventually crack cocaine. We're going to talk about freebase, which was ethanol, and it was for the rich. As long as the rich is fine, but as soon as it hits the poor. But back to the hippies. Everything and the anti-war movement more or less ended because of you could call it, some may call it the massacre, but the Kent State incident. Go look that up. 1970, Kent State. I believe it was April 1970. And that ended the era. Pretty much all these leaders were dead. Then we had the Black Panthers. Okay, the Black Panthers, very misunderstood group. They were not ready. You got to understand the times of the Black Panthers. Okay, what they were coming. And like I said, heroin helped destroy the black community, and eventually you see crack. Okay, the crack epidemic, which was fabricated and made because the media pushed that jazz. It wasn't there until it was pushed. Now, the thing about the Black Panthers were targeted because they were a threat. You got to understand all these threats. Huey P. Newton especially was a spokesperson. He was assassinated as well. Then we move down the line, okay, to Tupac. Pac. But let me go back a little bit further to that. Somebody you not expect. Kurt Cobain, who I generally keep saying he was assassinated. This dude was about the counterculture. All this counterculture, right? This dude, he was no longer he was trying to buck, and even his third album, In Utero, was not trying to be about it. He was an artist, a true artist, and he wasn't about this famous stuff. And it was, it was a seeming suicide. But it was said that this dude had so much heroin, he couldn't have, in his system, he couldn't have pulled the trigger. And this dude wasn't found till like 8 days later. Now, Courtney Love and a few others may have been involved. Okay, we don't know. But Kurt Cobain gets taken out. The leader, the voice of Generation X. And you have Tupac get taken out. The voice of the streets. He gets taken out in '96. And Tupac, son of a Black Panther. He was speaking about it. He was an icon. Both of these were icons. He got taken out. Okay, and eventually you could even say MJ, Michael Jackson, was assassinated because this dude, I'm talking about money. He had a Beatles album, for example, and he wouldn't give it up, the rights to it up. So there's a lot of stuff that goes along, and that's a whole different thing about the whole music industry. Okay, had him assassinated. You could say to some degree Tupac as well, but there was probably more than that. Now, why do I bring all this up, and why the Black Revolution never happened? It's been a systematic oppression for centuries, okay? And it culminated into culminated into a firestorm in some, many call, including myself, the greatest political experiment of all time. Now, I'm an anarchist, ladies and gents. But when you look at all these elements, every time a leader or a revolution rises up, it gets shut down. All the leaders are assassinated, and the people, they lost their will. And when Bobby Kennedy died, the people lost their will. They lost their will. Huey P. Newton and a lot of the Black Panthers leaders were taken out, whether in prison or killed. It killed the momentum. The Black Revolution never occurred because the people lost. The people became, and then people were promoted. For example, we have a black president. You could say, okay, that's good. Historically, that's good. But at the same time, it doesn't change anything. Put them niggas, put them black people, in a position of comfort and wealth. Some of them, and they'll be comfortable and complacent. They'll adopt. They'll try to assimilate into the society in which we built. We have them trapped. We'll trap them in mindsets. We'll put them systematically at a disadvantage, many of them, from the beginning, in the ghetto. And a lot of dudes not being able to get out of the ghetto. Some of them by their own personal choices. Others because, take it as you will. I present this situation a lot of times to people to think about. When say you have a boy, okay, whether you be 10, 11, 12 years old. He watches his parents, if he has both parents, mom, pop, whatever. His grandfolk, his grandparents, grandpa, grandma, whoever it might be, and possibly other elders as well. He watched these people struggle, break their backs every single day of their lives, or at least most of their adult lives, at least that he knows of. And they're getting really nowhere. They're just scraping by paycheck to paycheck. Then he checks out the pimp, the slang of the drug dealer. Whether you agree with dealers or not, doesn't matter. He sees that quick, fast money. Now he knows what life it'll lead. It'll lead to incarceration, being locked up, arrested, imprisoned, would lead to possibly him having an early death. But he looks at it and he's like, think about this choice. Do I break my back for the rest of my life and nothing happens? Or do I make that quick money and oh well? Because either way, I'm still a slave, more or less. I'm still, get it while I can or get it never. These are the kind of situations that have been presented. Or, you have to be an entertainer, whether it be an athlete, entertainment, but it's part of entertainment now. A rapper, especially rappers, sometimes a singer in the past, an actor. We don't talk about doctors, we don't talk about lawyers, but judges. We don't talk about these other positions, teachers, pastors. A lot of these things. What is it? We were presenting an image. We're presenting images to limit, to narrow our focus. And so the focus, and then people talk about the whole feminist movement, which is a whole separate discussion, to say that aided in feminist ideology, or I should say modern feminism, because things change. Why the Black to make this video short after presenting all this, why the Black Revolution never happened? Because all the leaders black and or white. The major ones assassinated. The people got divided, got killed off, got dissuaded. I can go back to the Native Americans, for example. Pivotal point in history would be a completely different history. Is if Tecumseh was able to rally all the eastern tribes, completely different history. Okay, the U.S. would have been its actual size, shouldn't have been went west of the Mississippi to begin with, but that's a whole different discussion as well. So the Black Revolution never happening is a result of outside manipulation as well as internal implosion. Okay, it imploded, as well as people not understanding, the black intellectuals are missing in a lot of cases. So black intellectuals, people not listening to black intellectuals, people having too they're indoctrinated, brainwashed, and programmed. And this goes beyond just blacks. This is all races. White, whether it be whites, Latinos, whether it be Asian. A lot of people have become, they can't think outside the box. They can't think outside of the system in which they are. And even those who try, a lot of times, are still, comfortable with what they're familiar with. Okay, they still want to try to use the same ideological points and the philosophies that come from it and try to promote their thing, when in fact it can't work. It can't work. Okay. Unexpected one. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me your thoughts on what you think happened and other points, because I dealt with a lot of general overview of this jazz, and tried to tie and weave in how this all this is from back to antiquity. What happened? It was this mindset, this mentality that it shifted. It shifted from these blacks being intellectuals to there was a curse, but it was a lot of fear. Because the thing about it with the slave, because why not let the slaves read? Because an educated man, an intellectual person, Pac says something about this. Okay? There's nothing more dangerous than an educated black man. A black intellectual sees things, sees the world different, able to get a following, able to speak, able to combat the nonsense. And you can't really touch him unless you off him. Understand that? Very dangerous. You can't allow that kind of danger to be passed on. You can't allow that kind of logical, reasonable thought, rationale, logic, reason, facts, and everything. You can't allow that to get passed on to the next generation. So you just cut off the head before it ever, splits. And it's not going to be like a hydra. It's going to be a chicken with its head cut off. Okay? Because if it's a little bit, it becomes that hydra. Understand this? And also, when you limit the black population, you limit all populations. Because if you will ever look, from cultural standpoint, from music, which I won't get into fully, but whether it been blues, whether it been rock and roll, whether it been a lot of things, except for pretty much country, most folk, but most genres of music originated from black people, the black culture, the spirituals and gospel and this and that. Okay, and so we can hijack the culture. You don't want to give them credit for it. You don't want to allow them freedom to the expression, because the self-expression. When a man, I tell this people, it's like the thing about Napoleon. After Napoleon, the people had through Napoleon's conquest, the people of Europe, the different European peasants and European populations of these different nations or unformed nations at the time, they tasted freedom, they tasted liberty. And when mankind, when humans taste that freedom, they can't get enough. They want more. They don't want to be limited again. They don't want to be chained, whether it be physical, mental, emotionally, or spiritual. Okay, they want that freedom. They'll fight for it. They'll die for it, because it's that vital to what it means to be human, what it means to have the natural rights of mankind. Okay, like I said, tell me your thoughts on the discussion. Tell me your thoughts on this topic, this subject, and till next time, I had to make this video. I had to do it, and yeah, peace. Have a beautiful day, beautiful night.